Welcome to the Confidence Through Health podcast. My name is Jerry Snyder. As a health, wellness, and sports performance coach, my goal each week is to bring you experts to help you take control of your health and build your self-confidence. Thanks for including me today on your journey to better health. As an elite level runner and coach, I'm excited to introduce you to the All In Running Club. The All In Running Club exists to help you become a better runner. Whether you're a beginner, an elite runner, or anywhere in between, the mission of the All In Running Club is to give you the tools you need to find your success in running. Join today to take advantage of the 75% off yearly membership rate offer. Click the link below in the show notes to learn more. So thank you, Denise, for being a guest on the Confidence Through Health podcast.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
So you started out, I guess you've always had this urge to help people from like a healing standpoint, because you started out as a nurse and did that for decades before transitioning to more of a mental health approach to helping people. So where does that healing, like wanting to help people, where does that come from for you?
It's very interesting. For me, as a child, I was always very intuitive. And I always had this sense that I knew beyond what I could see.
Mm-hmm.
And when I started to gravitate toward nursing, it just seemed like that was the place for me. It just felt like a natural fit. I enjoyed working with patients. I enjoyed the challenge and the science of the physical health and of the body, and enjoyed it for many, many years until I started to get a little older, and the grind of working at the hospital and long hours and so forth got to be a little bit too much physically.
Yeah.
And so then the bridge from physical health to mental health seemed like a natural transition for me.
Is that because the experience in critical care of seeing the mental side of healing, right? Because I imagine you saw a pretty wide spectrum of somebody that comes in with a very, massive issue, but they could be, on one side very positive about their overall outlook and it helps the healing process, or very negative about everything, and you just seem that just continues to snowball.
Yes. The interesting thing too is a lot of times when we're in crisis, a lot of the family dynamics will start to unravel in the waiting room. So it's a very stressful time. And maybe there was a little bit of dysfunction in the family, but now that somebody is sick and they're in crisis, a lot of times I worked as much with the families as I did with the patient.
Yeah. No, I can definitely see that being something that, because especially if it's something that pushes, whether it actually is an end of life or it pushes to that, like this could be the end. I imagine that throws emotions like to just levels and brings out all kinds of different negative energy and toxicity in their emotions and all that kind of stuff.
Yes, we saw it quite a bit with COVID. A lot of things that maybe we'd been overlooking or sort of working through and not paying attention to, when all of a sudden we had several months of staying home, a lot of people's old traumas started to bubble up. We saw a lot of people gaining weight and a lot of alcohol during that time.
Right.
So we saw that any type of crisis will sort of get that stirred up, if you will.
Right. And a lot of times that like alcohol, drugs, or even like it can be things that can be seen as more positive health, but can always be taken into a negative, like, just overdoing your time in the gym or overdoing, your exercise. Like that's all coping mechanisms because we don't really understand how to deal with what's going on.
Correct. What happens is the nervous system gets out of balance. So it's the difference between our sympathetic, which is when we're busy and doing and so forth, and parasympathetic, when we're relaxing, when we're spending time doing things that we enjoy. Body gets out of balance. And then what happens with that is the mind gets very active. And the mind is very fear-based. So the mind wants, it's everything is becoming a problem to us. The body can't handle that. Because the body's relying on the mind. So the body finally says, listen, I need a break. And so then the mind comes up with these not so great ideas, which is where a lot of our addictions and habits come. And we tend to overdo it because we're trying to balance the body.
Right. And so, and that's it. That's where the energy piece comes in, right? Where it's like you've just built up all this energy that has to be used somewhere. And if you don't have the proper outlet to use it, it manifests in other ways within the body, right?
Yes. And if you want to know how out of balance the nervous system is, watch how much you need of something to feel better.
Hmm.
So if I'm drinking 5 or 6 alcoholic beverages, nervous system's really out of balance.
Yeah.
If I have to exercise 4 hours a day to feel okay, my nervous system's really out of balance. So it's a really good way that the body, we can understand what the body is trying to communicate if we just watch what we're doing and understand why we're doing it.
Right. And so when you're seeing this and going, okay, I want to transition into, away from nursing and into helping people with this side of, um, the wellness journey, right?
Mhm.
Like, like how difficult is it to get people to sort of to understand and to dig into themselves and see that they may actually have an issue internally?
Very difficult is the short
Yeah.
answer. With when we're physically ill, we have some sort of pain or we have a
Right.
symptom, and that will cause us to notice it and go to the doctor. We don't
Right.
think twice about it. Gosh, I've
Yeah.
had this pain for a couple of weeks now. I want to see if there's anything going on.
Right.
Yet when we're mentally not okay, so we're struggling with anxiety and depression, we just push through that.
Yeah.
I don't have time to go. This is something everybody in my family deals with. I know how to handle my stress.
Right.
And what the body is trying to do is to let us know that no, we're not okay. We need to go find out what's happening and how to correct it. But a lot of times by the time they get to me in the office, it's gotten way out of hand.
Yeah. And then and a lot of times that when you go to the doctor, especially for something that's more of a chronic issue, right? Like, I mean, if you break your arm, obviously we all know you broke your
Mhm.
arm, you go, you get it fixed. But for those chronic things that maybe, like you said, have been going on for for 2 weeks, or for some people for months, like, I have this pain that shows up every 2 days and then it goes away. So I'm like, oh, well, it goes away, so I'm fine. But that
Mhm.
continues to happen and happen. A lot of times that's an energy imbalance, that's a trauma issue, that's an emotion that we've stuffed down. I mean, there's so many different things, but it's more of a mental health issue than it is really a physical health issue at the core, right?
Yes. And so what happens is depending upon what emotions that we struggle with, it will manifest in certain areas of the body.
Mhm.
And so what I understand is when I find out what's going on health wise, I could almost stop them right there and tell them what they're experiencing throughout their mental health journey.
Yeah,
The other challenge is by the time they get to me, they would like it fixed right away.
of course.
So it's like, when can I expect to be better and so
Yeah,
forth? And so what I say to them, I said, listen, you're almost coming to me 75 pounds overweight. I mean,
yeah,
this is something that's going to, yes, we can correct, but it's going to take some work.
yeah.
This is
Well,
why a
and
lot of people want to go for medication so
right,
quickly.
right. And sometimes it's a trigger that happened because of a trigger. Like it's a multi-layered issue. And so the symptom only showed up because the camel finally broke its back. Like it's been carrying this stuff for years and years and years sometimes.
Yes, I'd also see that in the ICU. They would come in, they'd be in critical care, they've had a massive heart attack, and they were
Mhm.
surprised. And yet, if you looked at their history and their health history, it was not such a surprise.
Yeah,
I mean, things just don't happen unless you have an accident or something like that. Mental health is the same thing.
yeah,
These things manifest over years and years and years, and by the time they play out physically, we're sort of shocked with that. But actually, the body is very sophisticated, and it knows what it's doing. And certainly, when it sort of misbehaves, it's doing that for a reason.
right. And it's going to course correct, right? Like if it's saying, okay, well, this, the symptom's going to manifest in this part of my body, like a lower back pain. A lot of people have
Mhm.
lower back pain, right? And a lot of times lower back pain is because of a trauma that's happened and you've stuffed
Yes.
it, and that's where it's going to show up. But your body, but if you don't go get care for it,
your body's going to do everything it can to find a workaround so that you can still live your life
Mhm.
as best you can, right? And so that's the mind saying, okay, you want to do that? We'll just figure out a different way around it until there's no other way.
Correct. It will always try to balance itself.
Yeah.
And even when I was saying before about drinking a lot of alcohol, it's trying to balance. It's just that the mind is sort of cueing inappropriately of what it needs to balance.
Mhm.
But the body is sort of wise in that it says, listen, I really can't do this. I need a lot of correction to feel better. And so the mind says, no problem. Let's get a 6 pack of beer and let's
Right.
just take care of it. So
Right.
we have to be careful. If we have a little bit of more of what we call an inner knowing, which I call as our godly knowing, we take a step back and go sort of above the mind and
Mhm.
say, no, that's probably not a good solution. Let's do something else.
Right. And then we look into whether it's talking with someone or, you know, spending that time in meditation or going out in nature or finding those things that we know calm our body, right? Like, I mean, that's one of the things I always tell people when they say, "Oh, I don't really have that big deal with stress. I know how to handle it and all that." I'm like, "Well, when you go to the beach and you put your feet in the sand, what do you feel?" Like instant
Mhm.
relief. I'm like, "Okay, well then you have stress." Like,
Yeah,
right? Like if you can instantly feel that like super like then like you're carrying stress with you when you do that. And so most of us don't live by the beach. And so it's like we can't go to the beach every day to do that. We have to find those other avenues, right? And those things aren't necessarily the same for everybody.
correct. We have to find out what brings us joy. One of the questions that I ask, what are your hobbies?
Mhm.
And people say, I don't really have time for hobbies. Okay, that's a concern.
Yeah.
Are you religious? Do you have any relationship with God? Are you spiritual? No. Do you have a good network of friends? Not really. Okay, so now I'm looking for lots of problems, probably a lot of depression, a lot of anxiety. The other thing is one of the ways that a lot of us try to get into parasympathetic relaxing is we get on our phone.
Right.
And that's probably one of the worst things that we can do to balance the body because it's just really numbing the mind. It's not
Yeah.
really doing anything. And we tend to do it every spare minute,
Yep.
many of
Yep.
us.
Yep. No, and that's something that honestly I'm guilty of right now. I'm a runner. I'm an athlete. My listeners know that, and I'm dealing with an Achilles issue right now, so I can't run because I've got to let it heal. And so I'm finding myself on my phone a lot more in the last 2 weeks that I haven't been able to run than I normally would be. And I'm like, what is the deal? What is the and I totally get because it's wired. The people that have all the apps and all the games and all the media and all the content, they all know the triggers that we're trying to find release for. And so it is a cycle that you have to physically manually break, and
Yeah.
I say physically, but sometimes mentally, like you have to put a stop to it and like, okay, I'm going to break this and do something else. I'm going to go outside. I'm going to, read a book versus, looking at a screen,
Mhm.
communicate with someone, you know, there's other avenues that, like you said, hobbies, a lot of times we have time for hobbies. We just don't make the
We
time
do.
for hobbies, right?
We do. And it's really sad to see, or you'll see couples where I'll say, what is your evening routine? Well, I get on my phone and he gets on his phone. And so there's no communication.
Yeah.
There's no connection. Or we go out to a restaurant, we both order and then we get on our phones.
Right.
And we're really becoming a very lonely society because we're not taking time to connect to each other. We're going into the brain gets rid of a lot of dopamine doing that,
Mhm.
but it's almost like junk food. It's
Yeah.
not healthy.
Yeah.
Certainly we connect. I mean, I don't want to say it's a terrible thing, but again, it's almost like junk food.
Yeah.
You can have some, but you shouldn't have it all day long.
Right. Well, and it's a big piece of, your book, Healing Your Body by Mastering Your Mind. Like it's understanding what your mind wants and how to use it, not just from an intellectual standpoint, but the emotional side, the mental health side plays such a massive role in your overall health
Mhm.
that, you can eat perfectly and you can exercise the perfect amount and still be not well. overall because you're not addressing the, the mental side of what you need.
Yes. What I see a lot is people get very attached to their negative experiences.
Mhm.
And so what they do is they hold that in their body. And then these experiences become lenses of how they look at future experiences. So they call it filtering. They take all the good things in their life and they let that go to the bottom. And they talk about the bad things that have happened,
Mhm.
the bad parts of their childhood and so forth. Not saying that they didn't happen, but at some point we have to grow from those experiences and let them go through the body,
Yeah.
because these emotions sit in the body and they just fester and fester. And this is why the mind gets so active.
Yeah.
The mind says, oh, this is awful. This is terrible. And then the body says, listen, this is causing me a lot of distress, because the body's following the mind here.
Yeah.
And it's a lot to hold.
And so is this why that like you see some people or you hear about some people that, you know, they whether they get a diagnosis that's really bad from a health standpoint, or they've just got this, maybe they're in a job that's really bad and they switch job, and all of a sudden their life just seems to do a complete 180 and everything turns around. All of a sudden everything's perfect because of how they addressed it mentally.
Mhm.
Right? They didn't really change anything in their physical routine, or they were just like, nope, I'm not dealing with this. I'm going to mentally make a 180 and life's going to be completely different. You see them 6 months later and you're like, wow, what happened to you?
Mhm. This is why they talk about vision boards and mindfulness. It's deciding like what you need to feel fulfilled.
Mhm.
If it's the job that's not doing it, and people go, I don't have a choice. And I go, well, you always have a choice.
Right.
We don't want to make a choice because we're scared. I mean,
Sure.
of course, we're going to do something new and we're afraid of that. But it's learning what I say, if it's not dangerous, just push through it.
Yeah. Well, and
Because,
that's yeah, if it's not dangerous or illegal, right? Like it's like,
right, right.
you know, I mean, like then yeah, go for it, and your body will figure out how to adapt to that change.
Mhm.
And as long as it's bringing you a positive, right, a positive feedback loop, that's what we're looking for. These negative feedback loops that we keep getting into, um, they don't stretch our mind enough. And so it really does, our brain and our mind just sort of gets on that wheel. It's like, oh, we're just doing this again. Okay, well, okay, whatever. Like, and we really go on autopilot, and then that's not what our body really wants. That's not what our mind really wants.
No, and to think the way that we grow and learn is we have to have something uncomfortable,
Mm.
or we would never experience it. I mean, it's easy
Right.
when life is easy, it's like, oh, this is great. And it is great, but you're not really growing and learning and doing anything.
Right.
So when I get challenged, the first thing if I'm not happy about it, I'll say, okay, what can I learn here?
Yeah.
Or, okay, so I don't want to be pushed out of my comfort zone. And then I say, you're okay. I mean, I could be pushed out of my comfort zone. I don't like it sometimes, but I know that it's good for me.
Right. Well, and from a spirituality standpoint, like there's so much for us to learn, both as individuals and as a collective whole, that I think we still haven't come close to learning. And you look back at people like Socrates and Plato and people like Confucius, and like that we're looking at the bigger picture of life,
Mhm.
you know. And when you get away from your phone, and maybe you get away from, okay, I got all these bills to pay this month, and that kind of stuff, and you look at the bigger picture of life, your mental health is a huge piece of your purpose in
Mhm.
fulfilling that vision that you were thinking about, a vision board, and getting to that place. Like we can't ever get there if we don't have a positive mental health standpoint, right?
Correct. And life can be our teacher.
Yeah.
Our mental health is the lens at which we look through the world. And so we have to remember that. And so when I say, when God or the universe is trying to teach us something, it's going to be uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And that's okay. And
Yeah.
if we don't want to learn the lesson, of course, we get free will. So we say, listen, I don't want to learn this now, which is
Mhm.
fine, but it'll come around again a little bit harder next time.
Right.
And so then I
Yeah.
said, well, listen, if you don't want to see it again, then work through it and move past it and it'll be taken care of. But a lot of times it takes us a few times to be willing to do it, which is fine, but
Yeah.
it's not going to go away.
Well, and it's funny. That's one of the things that my wife and I, we've been married, will be 24 years coming up next month. And we joked, like, sort of, I mean, at the time, I don't think we were joking about it, but now we can look back and go like, oh, okay, we just totally missed the picture. And that, like, every couple of years I'd switch jobs. I'd get frustrated. I'd be like, yeah, this isn't for me. I got to find something else. And they were always in it really, I mean, like a corporate management field, but like completely different industry. I'd just go find something, and because I wasn't using what God told me was my purpose and my love and my passion. It was just, I just got to pay the bills, like find something to pay
Mhm.
the bills. And he finally brought me all the way back around to what I'm doing now about 8 years ago. And I'm happier than I've ever been. I've had more input and impact on people throughout. Like, I've been doing it for 8 years, which is the longest I've ever done anything, because I always left after
Mhm.
3 or 4 years because I was pushing them back. I was pushing back. I was like having to keep learning that lesson over and over. And, and still not financially where I even was back then, but it doesn't matter.
Mhm.
Right? Like, everything's taken care of that I need. And so it's like, oh, and times are harder, but like, it's interesting how when you put everything in and get that energy all flowing in the right direction,
Mhm.
that life seems to happen the way that it should, and your growth happens. And I've seen that in my life. And so that's why I try to get people to do the same thing and see that and it's, from my experience, it's both the mental side and the physical side. Like, they
Yes.
go together, because once you get them both going in the same direction, now you're snowball rolling downhill, and it's
Mhm.
massive transformation happens.
Yes. They call that flow.
Yep.
And they say that, the universe or God will provide you everything you need as long as you don't get in the way and push back.
Right. And that's huge. It's tough. It's tough to do, because we see that comparison of so many other things going on in other
Mhm.
people's lives, and think that that's where we have to be. And that takes, if we don't take the time, I think, to have that stop, that let the parasympathetic have its moment,
Mhm.
then it's really hard to find what it is that we're supposed to do.
Yes. And sort of when we go down the wrong path, the mind is leading the way.
Right.
I have to do this job. I'm not going to make enough money. And then if I don't do this and if I don't do that, and that's, they tell you all the time, don't make fear-based decisions.
Mhm.
And yet we do that with our livelihood many times.
Yeah.
I don't want to do that. I'm worried about this. I don't have time. And I don't know what we're in such a rush for. We don't
Yeah.
seem to ever have time for anything.
Well, that's true. I mean, like, especially the things that we know, and I would say most people know the things that they're supposed to do to have a healthy, happy life, and we seem to ignore and don't do those things.
Mhm. I think for me, what really helps me stay happy and healthy is being still.
Yeah.
My first, when I first wake up in the morning, I sort of have a prayer meditation time for about maybe 15 minutes. And then my first hour, no social media,
Mhm.
no computer, no nothing. And that sort of really brings me close to God. I just
Right.
feel very much at peace and so forth. I sort of set my intention for the day and then I ease into working.
Right. Well,
And
and
that has,
that is a huge change with cell phones, right, in our lives, because, like, if you think about it, um, back in the, I mean, I don't even think you have to go that far, but definitely in the 40s and 50s, like, you didn't get your news for the day until the newspaper, you went outside and got the newspaper,
Mhm,
right? And so you had no idea what was going on with anything
mhm,
until unless something really drastic happened in the family, somebody called you on your landline phone,
mhm,
right?
mhm,
And otherwise, like, you didn't really know what was going on until then. And so by the time you got to your paper, think about all the different things that you probably did before you
mhm,
actually stepped outside your house to pick the paper up.
mhm.
Um, Whereas now most of us don't even pick our head up off the pillow and we're scrolling through our phones.
Mhm. The other thing that we really don't do anymore is visit each other.
Yeah.
We used to, when I was younger, we would go to people's houses and we would visit, which was
Yep.
fantastic. And we don't visit anymore. We shoot each other a text. And, again, I think we're very overstimulated.
Yeah. And from a mind standpoint and a mental health standpoint, but that, like you mentioned dopamine earlier, that it really messes with the neurotransmitters and how the brain is physically working,
Mhm.
which obviously if you mess with that, you're going to mess with how the brain emotionally works and how it mentally works and your ability to to think through situations clearly enough.
Mhm. Yes, they call that executive functioning.
Mhm.
It's sort of taking a little time and thinking it through, just to say, okay, well, if this happens, what would be next?
Yeah.
What sort of what will happen? Not that we know exactly what will happen, but we have to take time and just sort of think about that.
Right.
But many times we're so busy and we're so rushed, we're not thinking about, and this is sort of the challenge of anxiety. People who are anxious probably chronically anxious, make the worst decisions ever
Mhm.
because they lose their ability to decipher what's actually sort of urgent or emergent and what's not,
Yeah.
because they tend to be worried about everything, and then they will miss things that are, very disturbing and that they need to pay attention to.
Right. And because they get in that loop, right? It's like
Mhm.
that fear-based loop of what could happen, and
Yes.
then miss out on, and I've heard that we spend so much time worrying about things that could happen, and there's such a small percentage of those things that ever actually do happen.
Yes. Yes. I tell people, like, probably maybe 1% of your life might be like a life or death situation.
Mhm.
And in that case, you really don't have that many choices.
Right.
We feel like we do, but we really don't. And
Yeah.
so I say, listen, most of life, you just need to handle it.
Yeah. And handling it comes down to, like, taking that time every day. Some people don't like I don't want to live on a routine, but you do need to have that time every day to decompress, to
Mhm.
let everything go, to just and it doesn't have to necessarily be by yourself, because you and your spouse can sit on the porch and do it. But people
Mhm.
used to do it for decades, sitting on the porch and just watching. And I think we look back, and I know as a kid when I would sit at my grandparents and they would do that, and I'd be like, isn't this boring? Can't we go do something? Can we da da da? But it's like for them, it was like, no, this is my time to let everything
Mhm.
go and
Mhm.
reconnect. Um, and it's funny, as you get older, you start to realize this, and you're like, oh, that's why they did that.
Mhm. Yep. Sit outside and maybe talk to the neighbors and
Mhm.
decompress, and very important that we don't seem to do anymore as
Yep.
much as we should.
Yep. And so when you relate the the mental health into the physical health and those those energy things that get caught, are there things that we can do on our own that, like, and I fully understand, like, there's times where like, okay, this is too much, you've got to go talk to somebody, you've got to seek
Mhm.
help to navigate through all this. But what are some of the simple things we can do to add into our daily routine to just be like, okay, this is how I can truly manage this without saying to myself, oh, I'm managing it but I'm really not doing anything.
One of the easiest things to do is to notice how you're behaving. For example, if you notice that 3 times in an hour you've gone to the refrigerator to look for some food,
Mhm.
your nervous system is not in balance. If you notice that when the phone rings, you're already irritated and you haven't even picked it up, the nervous system's out of balance. So just take a minute and notice, or if you're sort of frazzled, I call it very frenetic, running from room to room, and it's in such a hurry, nervous system's out of balance. So before things sort of get out of hand, start to notice these little nuances that the body does, that it's trying to cue us that we're just There's just something that we're just out of balance.
Yeah.
And this is something that we need to just take a minute and sort of regroup and then start again. We need to reset.
Yeah.
But a lot
And
of times we just get the food and we keep going because we're so
right,
stressed.
right. Um, and typically in those situations we get something that's not, we're not going for carrots. We're going for something that's gonna compound the issue from a nutrition standpoint or from a stress standpoint
Correct.
versus, you know, um, we'll turn the TV on and turn the news on or we'll see commercials that drive us nuts and ask us for all the different things and drive that comparison because it's talking about new cars or, those types of things where it's like, you know, okay, get away from, turn that off and sit with yourself. And I think that's one of the scariest things for people is to sit with themselves.
Yes. And notice again with food, if when we grab sugar and carbs, it's because the mind is very active and the mind needs quick energy,
Mhm.
particularly if we overthink and we worry. Okay, that takes a lot of energy from the body. So the body is not going to go for something that's not sugary. It needs something that will convert to energy very quickly.
Right.
So that's another cue. What are
Yeah.
we going for?
Mhm. And
Did we
it's
eat?
right. Yeah. And that's a huge sign that I think a lot of people and I think it's ingrained a little bit in us because of we were at least in my generation, I remember being brought up in like, okay, everybody calm down in class and we'll get a sucker. Or, you know,
Mhm.
if you do well if you're really nice and calm at the doctor's office, we'll give you a treat. And it's like that reward system of sugar. And so when we're looking for something like, okay, we've taken it to that next level of my body's looking for something and I need to calm it down. Well, I always felt better when I got this, when I was stressed at the dentist office, I got this afterwards.
Mhm.
And so part of it's habit and part of it's, I think, just not taking that moment to go like, wait, what does my brain really need? What does my body really
Mhm.
need
Mhm.
versus let me just mask it with something.
Mhm. The body, as I said before, is very sophisticated. It will let us know what it wants and what it needs. It's just with mental health, we're not quite as good as understanding why we're doing what we're doing.
Yeah.
Because we've gotten sort of blind to, and we're not really aware of why we're feeling this way. Why are we chronically anxious? Chronically anxious, you should be in a therapist's office getting some insight and some help. Because
Yeah.
if you don't correct that, it will come out. It comes out, and stomach issues and heart issues are primarily where anxiety seems to stem.
Yeah.
Or-
And so from a overall viewpoint, from a society standpoint, like I really think that I'm starting to come around to definitely the thought process of we've got this backwards in that, when you're really, really sick mentally, okay, well, you need a therapist. It's almost like everybody needs a therapist.
Mhm.
Like it's not just that, it's like everybody needs to be, maybe not on a weekly basis, but everybody needs to have that that connection and that reality of like, okay, there really is a lot going on. There really is a lot in our
Mhm.
lives. And if we don't consistently have somebody to check in with that can help us navigate it, then we are going to hit roadblocks that are going to knock us down physically.
Yes, and even if life is going well, each
Mhm.
developmental stage that we go through is we have challenges. My husband recently retired, and that was a major challenge. It was just all of a sudden, it was a big shift in our dynamics and so forth. And for me, a therapist was very helpful to get me to transition because I really didn't know what to do with it.
Yeah. Well, so that reminds me of in your book, you tell a story about moving to Florida and
Mhm.
how that manifested in physical.
Mhm.
And of course, later on, in hindsight's 2020, you can always look back and go like, oh, this connects the dots to all these things.
Mhm.
But in the moment, the physical issues you were going through, you then didn't necessarily connect them to the life that was happening, right?
Correct. And a lot of times when we get a physical issue, we say, well, that runs in my family.
Mhm.
So we sort of blame it on our heritage that this is why I have the problems. But I can tell you from a therapist standpoint, a lot of these behaviors are learned. And so
Yeah.
we repeat the patterns. And so, yes, we're manifesting the same physically, but it just because, mom or dad had a condition doesn't mean that you're automatically sort of prone to get it.
Right.
We sort of create our own destiny with that.
Right. Well, and that's something that when my wife and I got married, we had to learn, and we went to counseling for, because neither one, I mean, it's going to sound funny, but I mean, in a marriage, it happens, and it's realities that neither one of us knew how to fight properly,
Mhm.
and because we came from completely different ends of what seeing our parents react and how they lived in
Mhm.
it. My parents were the fighters and the yellers and the screamers and the storming out of the house. And her parents were they never fight, because they only did it behind closed doors and never showed the kids how to properly communicate their issues through.
Mhm.
And so we had to learn how to do that. And now we try to do that in front of our kids. We're not yeller screamers. We're not, but we talk and communicate through, and our kids will be like, what? Like, y'all are mad at each other. Y'all okay? We're like, yeah, we're fine.
Mhm.
We know how to navigate it. We're talking through it. Everything's gonna be fine. And we come back
Mhm.
together and we, reconcile. And so when you talk about like learned behaviors, it's very much, especially on the mental side, it's learned behaviors of how you deal with things, because you see how your parents do it and you just assume that's how everybody does it. And
Mhm.
that gets you in trouble if you're not coming up from a proper upbringing from a mental health standpoint.
Or even if you didn't like it, like you would say, I
Mhm.
just hated it when my parents argued. I did the same thing. I went to counseling because my parents were yellers.
Yeah.
And although I hated it, I just found myself yelling. I would yell first and ask questions later. And I
Right.
thought, This is something I just don't want to repeat." So, and the therapist was very helpful, getting me to learn how to communicate in a way without screaming.
Right. Well, and that was, I remember my wife sitting in the therapy session, and she was like, well, how did your family? And she said, well, they didn't fight, we and found out it was behind closed doors. And but the therapist was like, well, that's not good either. And my wife was
Mhm.
like, what?
Mhm.
Like, what are you talking about? Um, because I think it's so many times, and especially for those of us in a generation where it was early on in the two income families, and so there was a lot of change in how the family dynamic was. Um, and so every generation has these issues. Like now it's the generation of the technology, and you're always connected to everybody. And like you said, you're losing that physical connection because it's just a text or message away. You don't have to even, I know people that are like, don't even call me, just text me. I don't even want to talk to you.
Mhm.
Right.
Mhm.
And that's adding a whole nother twist in the mental side of, because at the core of who our being is we're a relational, physical, in-person communication
Mhm.
being.
Yes. And a lot of things get misunderstood via text message.
Yep. Yep.
So, I mean, everything has its challenges for sure.
Right. And
Hmm.
so learning that and navigating that, and I think having the outsider who's not invested in, the conversation or the conflict or the life that's going on within your house, oftentimes, whether it's mental health, whether it's physical health, whether, oftentimes that person's able to say, oh, you're missing this piece or that piece, or I can
Hmm.
see the path where this goes, and that's one of the things you say, I can see where things fall
Hmm.
off in people, and it's because you're invested because you're trying to help them, but you're not invested because you're in the middle of the weeds of the situation, right?
Hmm. And usually I do maybe a 10 or 15-minute intake very quickly. And people will say, should I fill something out before I come? And I say, no, I like to ask my own questions. But I already have a really good understanding of what's going on based on the 10 or 15 questions that I ask.
Mhm.
Now the challenge is to help them recognize that at a pace that's sort of suitable for them. You certainly don't want to push too hard because that gets overwhelming.
Yeah.
And you don't, but yet you don't want to sit back and really not offer anything because that's not helpful.
Yeah.
So there is definitely a little bit of a challenge on the mental health side of the
Right.
office.
Yeah.
For the
Well, and
parent.
because ultimately, like just like the physical side of it, ultimately your brain knows how to heal your body
Mhm.
if you just like get yourself out of the way.
Yes,
And that's the
yeah,
hardest part.
it is. It is. And it's fear that really sort of holds us, keeps us back because we're
Yeah.
afraid. We don't want to make the wrong decision. What would happen if that we do this? What will happen if we don't do that? And so that's where we start to trip up a little bit.
Yeah. And sometimes as parents too, sometimes it's, we try to make things perfect for our kids,
Mhm.
right? Whether it's, helicopter parents or, whatever you want to call that, the
Mhm.
generation of parents that are just trying to make their kids' lives as easy as possible, as perfect as possible. And, I tend to fall into the, hey, they need to make some mistakes and that's how they're going to
Mhm.
learn. And so like, okay, well, they forgot something at home that they needed for class. Yeah, I have the time. I could drive it up to school and give it to them. Or they could
Mhm.
figure out and navigate through,
Mhm.
okay, teacher, I've got to get it to you tomorrow. Can we do this? Can I bring it before school? And then they've got to navigate through remembering to do all those things,
Yes,
right?
yes.
And so like I tend to fall into that side of it because I think
Mhm.
that's going to help them create strategies that will also not just in that situation, but in life in general.
Mhm.
Because a lot of us don't have those basic strategies anymore. So when
Mhm.
something comes up that's tough on the mental health side, we don't have the strategies to try and figure it out.
Mhm. I've also seen with kids, I work a lot with children, many of them that are in gifted program and we're not playing outside anymore. So they're in a lot
Mhm.
of sporting events or extracurricular. And with that comes a lot of anxiety
Mhm.
because it's a very hectic time. It's like, from school, I go to this practice and I have this and I have dance and I have so forth. So they come into me very, very anxious and very overwhelmed. It's just too much on their plate.
Yeah. And sometimes they just got to be kids.
Yeah, yeah. And the
You know?
parents are very, they have to get A's, they have to be great at this that's, and it's a wonderful goal. It's just not sustainable. And
Right.
it really causes them to struggle with mental health. In fact, I wrote a children's book about a little girl who came to me with a lot of stomach issues and she was just having a lot of anxiety.
Yeah. And that's, it's unfortunate that we see that. Um, but I'm of the belief that like, okay, like you said, that's great goals.
Hmm.
But not everybody is going to go to Harvard or Yale or Stanford.
Hmm.
Um, and there's a place for everybody to find their passion and
Hmm.
their ability to help, their community, their family, their friends. And when we fall into the system that we're sort of in, and that like it's all like planned out for them once they hit, we're struggling out with we have an eighth grader and we're in a very big, large school district. And it's like, okay, well, by your freshman year, you pretty much have to have your game plan all figured out for everything, all into like, including what you're going to study in college. And I'm like, I switched my degree plan like 4 times in college.
Hmm.
Like, why are we asking freshmen to figure this out?
Hmm.
Are there people that get it? Yeah, sure, there are. There are people that, at 9 years old, they know they want to be a doctor. I have a friend who was like that,
Hmm.
and he's a doctor and he loves it. But there's also people like me where it took till I'm almost 40 to figure it out.
Absolutely. You have to experiment and see what feels like a good fit.
Yep. And if you're not open to that and okay with the failure and the mistakes that so many people say is bad and negative, it can really weigh you down on the mental side.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely.
Yep. So, so how can people, you've written 3 books, right?
I have.
Okay. So, and these are available on Amazon?
They're on Amazon, but if any of the listeners would like to contact me through my website, I'd be happy to send them a copy of a book.
Awesome. Okay.
Mhm.
And the website is?
It's DeniseSchonwald.com. You'll
Okay.
put a link in that, or you'd like me
I
to spell
will.
it out?
Nope, I'll put a link in
And
there.
certainly, and there's also a little quiz, a 10-question quiz, if you'd like to, someone would like to assess their own mental health.
Awesome.
I'm licensed to see clients in Florida where I live, and I'm
Mhm.
also nationally licensed. So if listeners would like to consider an appointment, they can do that on my website also.
Awesome. And so briefly talk on that, because I know that COVID obviously brought this to the forefront with, telehealth and being able to do things over Zoom like we're doing now. But
Mhm.
like, that's not something that people should be afraid of, is like, okay, how can they properly treat me if they're not face to face?
Well, and it's true. Before COVID, people were not interested in any sort of virtual counseling. I took a second set of boards because I thought maybe in the future I might move out of Florida, and I just
Mhm.
wanted to have a national set of boards. After COVID, that became, I mean, we all got comfortable with Zoom and
Yep.
so forth. It's really convenient for people with busy lives because I work on the weekends, and so it really makes it convenient.
Yeah.
So, I mean, some people really prefer in person. I mean, that works too, but Zoom is a wonderful option if you have a busy life.
Right. Right. Well, awesome. Well, is there anything that we didn't touch on that you would be like, you know what, the listeners, this is one little helpful thing that can help them get through those, really stressful times, those really times where it's like, okay, my mental health is not where it needs to be. I know that, and how can I get it back to where it needs to be?
One of the simple things that I'd like to just remind everybody to be mindful of, accept life as it is.
Mm.
Just, things are going to happen that are going to be, I mean, eventually we're going to go through tragedy and suffering. There's opportunities there for growth. There's opportunity for healing. Accept people for who they are. We
Right.
get very frustrated with people. This causes a lot of our unhappiness. And there's not a thing that we can do to stop it
Right.
or to change it or to control it. So we need to learn to accept it and move forward.
Yeah. Well, and I'll tell you, I'm living that right now with my injury, because it's the hardest thing in the world to do for when you're an athlete and you love to exercise, you love to go run, especially, and you're told, nope, you've got to walk around in a boot for several weeks and you can't do all these things. It's a mental tough, situation, because I've lost my outlet. But as many people have told me, okay, well, it's 6 weeks. And I'm like, yeah, and 6 weeks in the grand scheme of life is a dot.
Yeah. And it's an
And so,
opportunity to create other outlets.
right. Yep.
So,
So I'm learning that myself right now. And it is something that I think comes around multiple times in our lives, right? It's one of
I
those things that
agree.
we're going to be reminded of over and over and over again. And it's
Mhm.
just a matter of mastering it. So,
Accepting what is.
yep. So thank you so much, Denise, for being a guest. It's been a great conversation.
Welcome. Thank you.
Thanks for checking out the Confidence Through Health podcast. Please subscribe, post a review, share this episode with those you love who need a little extra help with their health journey. Visit allinhealthandwellness.com to learn more about the coaching programs that I provide. All episodes are produced by the Social Media Cowboys, your source for all online marketing needs. Go to socialmediacowboys.com for more information.